Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. Welcome to the 34th lecture of TUMAC, Turkish Music Academic Circle. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Ersin Mıhçı from Münster University in Germany. The title of his lecture is The Relationship Between Arûz and Usûl in Ottoman Music. Dr. Ersin Mıhçı graduated from Heidelberg University with an MA in Musicology and Spanish. He was accepted to the graduate program in Transcultural Studies at the Cluster of Excellence Asia and Europe in a global context. He has defended his doctoral dissertation, Forging National Music on Both Sides of the Aegean in the 19th and 20th centuries, which focuses on how music in Greece and in the late Ottoman Empire contributed to the construction of national identities. Since 2015, he works as a research associate in the project Corpus Musicae Ottomanicae, where he edits and examines manuscripts containing Ottoman vocal music. Dr. Mıhçı, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you very much, dear Dr. Keskiner, for this kind introduction. Good evening to all listeners and participants, colleagues and friends. I would like to welcome everyone to my presentation. Can you see already my screen, Dr. Keskiner? The presentation?
Yes, absolutely.
So before I start my talk, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to the organizing team of the TUMAC who made this talk possible. It is a great platform to share thoughts and findings with the academic community and even beyond. In today's talk, I will speak about the relationship between Arûz and Usûl. For the study of Ottoman vocal music, I consider the analysis of the Arûz in relation to the Usûl crucial, and I believe they may give a new understanding of the interrelation between music, lyrics, notation, Usûl, and prosodic meters. My argument is that the lyrics in Ottoman vocal pieces were not given in the text underlay of songs randomly according to the composer's preference, but that the distribution of the text underlay followed actually determined patterns. A systematic analysis of these patterns shows that indeed there seemed to have been a relatively determined ratio between Arûz and Usûl. Once this pattern is known, it can also be used in the analysis of Ottoman vocal music to verify this ratio or to become aware of moments that deviate from the main pattern. In those cases, it is necessary to do more detailed analysis. I will come back to this later on in more detail. The information that I will present today can be used for the analysis of Ottoman vocal music, especially of the beste and semai genres. In this presentation, I will mainly deal with the Usûl and prosodic meter relationship in the song lyrics. I will, however, not include in this talk the tarannum sections, which also can be found in Ottoman vocal music. To approach today's topic, I have structured this talk into 4 chapters. It is likely that the audience may not be familiar with this topic or with the terminology that I'm using. Therefore, I have decided to give a concise introduction into the most important musical elements, which I consider necessary to follow my arguments and understand my thesis. In the second chapter, I will give you a clear step-by-step introduction into my methodology, the way I approach and analyze the relationship between Usûl and the prosodic meter of the song lyrics. And in order to have a better understanding of my methodology, I will also present some case studies and put my theories and claims into practice in the third chapter. The case studies will further explain why the questions that I raise are important in the analysis of the Ottoman vocal music repertoire and how, from a music editor's point of view, the text underlay of this repertoire could be approached. I will close this lecture with some concluding remarks and make some suggestions for future research in this field. As a research associate and music editor of vocal music in the project Corpus Musicae Ottomanicae, I have been dealing for 7 years now with a corpus of 19th century manuscripts that were notated not only in staff, but also in Hamparsum notation. The manuscript that I'm currently dealing with contains a collection of vocal music in Hamparsum notation that probably came into being in the latter half of the 19th century. One challenge in the edition of this manuscript is the missing lyrics. With other words, we have here a collection of Ottoman vocal music that is supposed to have song lyrics, which, however, the scribe only indicated for very few pieces as text underlay or as block lyrics. My task as a music editor and that of my colleague Neslihan Demirkol, who takes care of the text edition, is to identify the pieces, look them up in contemporary song text anthologies, and adopt the song text. Neslihan also prepared critical editions of the lyrics, checked the prosodic meters of the respective pieces, which I then used for the text underlay in the music edition. One important question to that I had to find an answer was how to distribute the song lyrics below the notation. This was actually the starting point for my research.
I'm so sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. I just got a message saying there might be a technical difficulty. I don't know if that can be fixed quite quickly, or just let's give a 10 seconds break.
Yes, sure.
Please, and then I'm sorry about this.
I'll see if I receive a message from the...
Have you received a message from Salih?
No, I haven't received anything. No, I haven't.
I see.
Okay. Now there's something.
Yes.
Okay. So they cannot see the. They probably only see my video, but not the presentation. So I would probably have to share the screen. So this is
okay. There must be a button there somewhere at the bottom, maybe.
Let me see.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for this.
No, at the bottom I can see there is a green share screen. On the screen.
Yes.
At the bottom there is share screen.
Now, okay. Now
Yeah?
I got it. Yeah. Now I know the problem.
Yeah.
I just have to find the correct. So now it should work.
Wonderful. Yes.
I hope this works now.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry for this inconvenience.
Let's proceed. Thank you.
Okay. So, right. So this was actually the starting point for my research. I started learning about prosody in Ottoman poetry and tried to combine and apply this knowledge in my daily work. I realized that also in Turkish academia, a systematic research on this relationship between usul and prosodic meters had gained only marginal scholarly attention. For me, as a music editor of Ottoman vocal music, it was crucial to understand how this relationship worked in order to develop a scholarly methodology that would help to construct a text underlay for the edition of Codex TR-EUNE 286. On this slide, I have brought you a screenshot from the Codex of page 37. You see the Sabah Beste in Usul Hafif by Tahir Efendi. The scribe indicated the first line of the Beste here in the heading, right here, as you can see. And as you may have noticed, the notation contains only the melody, but actually has no text underlaying. In this second example that I have inserted here, you will notice that syllables, the syllables of the lyrics that the scribe has notated in red ink above the notation here. Before I come to the relationship between usul and the prosodic meter, let me briefly explain some of the elements of the two rhythmical measures. This will make it easier to follow the methodology section of this talk. The following explanations of usul and arûz are very simplified and serve the solely aim to get an easier understanding of this talk. There are whole books and studies written on these topics by scholars of musicology and Ottoman literature studies. Here I will only provide some basic terminology and introduce some of the elements of usul and arûz. The usul in the context of Ottoman music is an important rhythmical element that clearly structures compositions. The usul, besides consisting of a determined and fixed rhythmic pattern, also measures the musical piece in terms of time. It is composed by a determined sequence of beats that have different qualitative elements and are usually expressed by the onomatopoetic syllables such as dum, tek, teke, tahek, and teke teke. The total number of beats, or darbs, as they are also called in primary literature, are determined for each usul individually. Here I have brought you one example from the so-called Hashim Bey Mecmuası from 1864. With the usuls Nim Berefshan, this is the first one here, which has 14 darbs or beats, the Frenkçin, this one here, 12, and the usul Fakhte with 10 darbs, this one here. And you see here the onomatopoetic syllables dum tek, and the relative duration of the beats. The length of the usul may vary considerably. There are short usuls such as duyek, but also usuls may have longer rhythmic patterns such as usul zencir with 60 or usul havi with 88 beats. In Ottoman music, the usul is usually indicated in the title line. However, the rhythmic pattern of the usul is normally not provided in the musical notation, as we can see here. It is rather taught silently while performing or it is played by a musician during performance. So here, for example, we have only the melodic line, but no usul. But in the editions that we prepare here in the Corpus Musicae Ottomanicae, we add the usul pattern in a second system below the transcription in order to facilitate the analysis of the melody and lyrics in relationship to the underlying usul that measures the musical piece. What the usul is for the music is the prosodic meter or vezin for the poem or song lyrics. In Ottoman vocal music, the song lyrics are usually derived from divan poetry that were composed with the arûz meter. The meters are categorized in bahirs, and each bahir may contain a plethora of prosodic meters which are named vezins. So we have here, for example, the first category bahir. Here I have the examples that I have brought are from the Bahri Hezech, and two of these examples now are these two prosodic meters, which are called vezin. They are different from each other, but consist of feet or of 4 feet. So we have the next category, feet or tefile. So the first foot here would be mefailun, the second foot as well mefailun, the third foot mefailun, and the fourth foot as well mefailun. Here in this prosodic meter, the feet they change. So the first is mef'ulu, mefa'ilu would be the second foot, and the third foot mefa'ilu, and fe'ulun the fourth foot. And then we have the smallest entity, which is the prosodic syllable, which are the me, the fa, the u, and the lun, for example, to give an idea. Today's talk is titled The Relationship Between Arûz and Usûl in Ottoman Music. The title already presumes that there is a relationship between the usul and prosodic meter arûz, but is this really true? In order to study this relationship, we developed a methodology and some preliminary steps that were necessary in order to start this research. The first step was to identify the lyrics that were necessary for editions based on handwritten and printed song text anthologies. Once we identified the songs and the lyrics, they were critically edited and their prosodic meter analyzed. This step was carefully prepared by my colleague Neslihan Demirkol. The second step was to analyze the distribution of the lyrics in the text underlay in Ottoman vocal pieces of the beste genre. In terms of musical structure, the beste consists of two sections, the zeminhane and the miyanhane, which are supposed to be equal in length. Both sections usually have also the same number of usul cycles. Thirdly, thanks to these two sections that have the same structural characteristics, it was possible to look if the lyrics in the two sections, the miyanhane and the zeminhane, had been distributed in the text underlay according to a specific pattern. The fourth step was to search for other Ottoman vocal pieces that had the same prosodic meter and usul in order to prove any relationship between the two metrical elements. Now, let me guide you in the following through those steps in more detail. The first step was to find the lyrics and prepare a critical edition, which also included here the scansion of the lyrics. The poems usually have a stable prosodic meter in all of the four hemistiches. That means that all of the hemistiches are composed in the same meter. So here, for example, we have the hemistich 1, the hemistich 2, the third and the fourth hemistiches, and all of them have the same prosodic meter. So with other words, we have here two stable elements that measure Ottoman vocal composition. So one is the usul that does not change throughout the piece, and the prosodic meter that also remains in most of the cases the same. In order to highlight the relationship between these two elements, I have created some conventions for my studies. So this line that you're seeing here in this slide is basically the outcome of the pattern between the prosodic meter from Bahri Hezej and the usul chamber. The first system shows the duration of the syllable in the vocal piece. Thus, for how long is the syllable being performed? This does not mean that they correspond with the rhythmic values of the melodies. They just indicate how long a syllable was sung. The original song lyrics were here replaced with the corresponding prosodic syllables of the meter. The numbers here 1, 2, 3, and 4 define the feet of the prosodic meter, as I had presented in the introduction. In this example, we have 4 feet that are performed in 2 cycles of usul chamber. So usul chamber is here 1 cycle, which ends on teke teke, and here this is the second cycle. And it can be said that the first and the second feet, they are performed in this first cycle, and the third and the fourth are performed in this second cycle. Furthermore, I have used different note heads to distinguish between syllables that form part of the prosodic meter and those that do not, but that belong still to the performed version. Whereas the standard note heads present the syllables that belong to the prosodic meter of the poem, other syllables that are part of the performed version, such as ah or yar, do not belong to the prosodic meter. Yet I have displayed them since they also give information about general conventions while performing the piece that have a specific usul and prosodic meter combination. So this one here. In some investigations, where I compare the distribution of syllables and become aware of significant deviations from specific patterns, I highlighted those with an arrow sign. The syllables marked with an arrow sign usually need further research and discussion in order to understand whether this deviation from a pattern was due to a scribal mistake or maybe a deviation in the transmission line. In any case, it is important to become aware of those kind of deviations, especially when preparing a critical edition of Ottoman vocal music. So during my research, it was possible to observe in the relationship between the prosodic meter and the usul determined patterns. These patterns seem to have the function of rules that were relatively strictly followed. There were, or there are, however, sometimes syllables that do not follow those patterns and which I call deviations. So some of these rules, to give some examples, are in many vocal pieces, short syllables such as me have a relative shorter rhythmic duration. So as you can see here, for example, the me is relatively shorter, have a relatively shorter rhythmic duration than the long syllables fa, i, lun, for example, that have a much longer rhythmic duration. If we look at many different compositions that have the same usul and prosodic meter, it is possible to observe a significant correlation in the way the text syllables were distributed below the notation and in relation to the usul beats. This relationship between usul and prosodic meter is not static, but seems to also leave some freedom to perform some syllables earlier and others slightly later. But all in all, the prosodic syllables are performed in certain sections of the usul in order to keep the balance and accurate relationship between usul and the prosodic meter. Whenever the placement of the syllables transgress the rules, I'm speaking of deviations. I know that all of these ideas are hard to grasp because they are very theoretical. Therefore, let me guide you through this analytical process step by step. So here's the first step. Analyze syllabication in each feet of hemistiches 1 and 3 in 2 sections of the same piece. Here I have prepared for you some materials based on a beste in Makam Beyati and Usul Zencir by Eyyubi Mehmet Bey with the first line, Bu rütbe der ifrakın edüp esiri beni. I have edited this piece from Hamparson notation and it can be downloaded for free from the CMO webpage. This version, however, is not the edition, but an analysis of the ratio between usul and prosodic meter. As I had told you in the introduction, bestes consist of 2 musical sections. The first is called the zeminhane, which I've presented here, and the mianhane. We have 2 elements that structure this piece in terms of time. So the one is the usul that structures the beste in its inner sections, of which it is composed, and secondly, we have the prosodic meter that measures the distribution of the lyrics in relation to the usul. Since the usul and the prosodic meter usually does not change within a piece, it is logical to pose the question whether the text underlay in both musical sections of the same piece was created in the same way. In the beste here, we can see that this is actually the case. We have here 3 systems. The upper system is the zeminhane, the middle one is the mianhane, and the lower one is the usul line. Furthermore, we have the original text underlay in scholarly transcription, here the first hemistich, here the third hemistich, and I also provided below the hemistiches the representative or the corresponding prosodic syllables. So first of all, we see that in both cases, in the zeminhane and in the mianhane, the 2 sections are opened by the syllable yar, as you can see here. And this yar does not belong to the regular prosodic syllable. Secondly, we see that the melody is, of course, different because the mianhane usually is a contrasting part in the beste to the melodic section of the zeminhane, but yet the prosodic syllables mostly coincide with the same usul beats. So let's go through them step by step. So we have here the first foot, the me, they correspond with each other. The fa, they correspond to each other. The fa is once more repeated in both of the hanes, so in zemin and mianhane. The i, this one is a bit later, but they still are almost on the same beat. The lun corresponds to each other, so does this lun, which is a repetition. Now we start with the second foot here. So the fe, the i, and the la coincide. then this la is once more repeated in the mianhane, not in the zeminhane. The tun coincides on the tahek. The third foot, the me and the fa coincides. The fa is once more repeated in the mianhane. However, in the zeminhane, it was filled in with a non-prosodic syllable ah. The e once more coincides. If we go further, we see that the lun, which is repeated, almost coincide, and the fourth foot also coincides, fi, i, lun, except for this very, very tiny differences. So this was an example that aimed to show the procedure to compare and observe correlations in the distribution of the text underlay. So here I looked at the two musical sections within the same piece, which are the zemin and the mianhanes. In the introduction to this talk, I also claimed that this relationship between arûz and usûl cannot only be observed within one vocal piece, but also in vocal pieces that have the same usûl and the same prosodic meter. Let me give you an example. So here I have brought you a PDF file that I have prepared for my studies and for the edition of the manuscript that I'm currently working on. Let me open it quickly for you. No, here we go. So this kind of research data will also be published as a supplement to the edition, so that researchers interested in this topic will have the chance to look at this methodology in more detail. In this document, I have compared 10 bestes, all labeled by the repertoire number here on the left side, which was assigned by the Turkish Radio and Television, so by the TRT. From the heading, you may already deduce what the study is about. So these 10 pieces that we are looking at here are all bestes in Usul Devri Kebir and in the prosodic meter fa'ilatun, fa'ilatun, fa'ilatun, fa'ilun, which belongs to the Bahri Remel. All of the pieces that you see here are different compositions. They have different makams and were composed by different composers and in different time periods. I've indicated the section labels such as Zemin Hane here, and later on you will see here up here the Mian Hane. Here we start first with the Zemin Hane. So the system at the bottom of the page is the Usul line. This is this Devri Kebir line here. At first sight, it is possible to observe the correlation that I had mentioned before. The relationship is not static and leaves also some space for performative freedom. We see, however, that in most of the cases, the syllables coincide with specific sections of the usul. So if we go for it step by step, we see that the first foot is opened here almost between this dum and this dum here, and that the E and the La are actually, so the first foot, basically the first three syllables of the first foot are performed in this first section of the Usul Devri Kebir, and that the tun coincides in most of the cases on this long tag. This applies also to the opening of the second foot on the fa, which follows this tag in most of the cases. If we go on, we see that also the E's and the las, they almost coincide on the same beat, except for this tun here. So I have marked this with an arrow sign. So I claim that it would have been more accurate to place this syllable on the teke pattern, which is here, similar to the other control pieces. So there is one way now to check this. We can look at the same piece and see if the scribe placed this syllable the same way. So just to look again, we are in repertoire number 5698. We are in the second foot, last syllable tun. Let's go to the Mian Hane. This is the piece. This is the first foot and the second foot in the syllable tun. So we see here that this deviation was not repeated in the Mian Hane, that it actually followed the general pattern as in the other 9 control pieces. So this is why I would consider this tune here as a deviation. Another interesting deviation that occurred is in the zeminhane of the third foot in this piece here, repertoire number 5701. So if we go to the third foot, first one, second one, and third one, we see that this tune was also notated inaccurately. So this is actually the place, more the place of the last syllable, and the tune should have been probably placed here on this tag, similar to the other control pieces. And here we can again check if the scribe of this piece notated this syllable the same way in the mianhane. So let's look. Mianhane, this is the piece we're looking at. The first foot, the second foot, third foot, the syllable tun. No, the tun actually follows the general pattern here, and this corresponds to this tag. And this is why I would consider this tune also as a deviation. I will elaborate more on this specifically on this deviation in my first case study. But now you have become familiar with the main methodology. Now let's put this methodology into practice by looking at some concrete case studies that I have been working with in my daily work. So we'll close this. Yeah. So the first case study that I would like to present is a beste in Makam Sabah and Usul Devri Kebir attributed to Zaharia, with the first line Gül Sitanı Nakşı Hüsnünden Baharistan yazar. It has the prosodic meter failatun, failatun, failatun, failun, which belongs to Bahri Remel, as we have already seen before. Now, in this PDF, let me open it quickly for you. In this PDF, I have again juxtaposed the two musical sections, zeminhane and mianhane, and looked if the syllables in the two sections were distributed accurately and in the same way. All in all, it is possible to say yes. So most of the syllables correspond to each other and were mostly performed in the same usul sections. So we can go here again step by step. So here we have the first foot that opens, well, here in the mianhane slightly later. The gu was here once more repeated in the zeminhane, but then again the e coincides, the la coincides, the tune almost coincides, then the opening of the second foot does also work. And this is the repetition of the previous syllable actually. The e coincides, the la coincides, the tune coincides. What does not coincide apparently here is the third foot, which requires more attention. So now we have here two versions, that of the zeminhane and that of the mianhane. Yeah. So we see here that the fa actually still, well, they are almost at the same beat, but then the e, la actually are here in the zeminhane much earlier, whereas here the e, la is much later, and the syllable tun is missing in this section of the usul. It follows in the next session. So at this point, I would consult my research where I analyzed the relationship between usul devri kebir and the prosodic meter to draw further conclusions. So let's have a look. So, and we see here that compared to the other control pieces, the syllable tune, so this is a zeminhane, so this tune was performed much earlier compared to the other control pieces. So it should have been actually, or it would have been more accurate to have notated this syllable on this tag later on. So this is why I would consider this syllable a deviation. So with other words, in this version that you see here on this slide, the piece has a scribe who provided a text underlay. Therefore, I would, in my editions, not necessarily intervene and correct this text underlay, but make a comment based on my research data. However, in the current manuscripts I'm editing, the scribe did not provide any text underlay at all. Therefore, I would prefer to indicate the more accurate reading of the text underlay according to the usul and prosodical meter pattern that I have shown you in the previous slide. And that would look like this. So we have we have here the zeminhane and the mianhane of one manuscript where the scribe did indicate the text underlay, and here this was the text underlay that I have created based on the research data that I have. So we see here that I have followed the more accurate distribution of the syllables, such as in the mianhane of the previous page. Yeah, I find this solution more suitable than rather repeating the inaccuracies of contemporary concordance sources. We can apply the same principles of the methodology also in the second case study that I have prepared. So this is the beste in Makam Beyati Araban by Sadullah Aga, but this time the piece is in Usul Hafif. The beste has the first line, Bülbülü dil ey gülirana senindir sen benim. And the prosodic meter belongs to Bahri Remel and consists again of the 4 feet, failatun, failatun, failatun, failun. Here also I proceeded as in the last case. First, I looked at the distribution of the syllables in the text underlay in the zemin and mianhanes in order to see if the distribution, first of all, actually corresponded to each other or not. I have indicated below the syllables of the song and lyrics also the corresponding prosodic lines, as you can see. So these are the prosodic syllables. This is the first hemistich, and this is the second hemistich. So the prosodic syllables do not start directly on the first beat. Instead, this piece opens with the exclamation "ah," yeah, as you can see here. That does not belong to the regular prosodic meter. The first foot seem to coincide in both hanes, as you can see. So this is fa, I, la, tun. But we see that in the second foot, the fa has actually no corresponding syllables in the mianhane. So at this point, again, it would be necessary to consult the analysis of the usul and prosodic meter pattern based on previous research that I had conducted based on those 10 pieces. In this analysis, Sadullah's piece, Sadullah Aga's piece, has the repertoire number 2660, which is this one here. And as you can see, the placement of the first syllable of the second foot stands out. So this is, I have highlighted here. And it should be probably have been placed here between this dum and this teke. Yeah. So as a music editor, I have to recognize this deviation and would probably reproduce it if the scribe had indicated this deviation in text underlay. In my current edition, however, this was not the case. So I provided the text underlay based on this research. Therefore, I prefer to offer an alternative reading according to a more accurate usul and prosodic meter pattern. So here I have juxtaposed 2 zeminhanes of the 2 sources. So we have the same piece here, just from 2 different sources. The upper system is based on a manuscript where the scribe did indicate a text underlay. The middle system is based on my current edition where the scribe did not indicate any text underlay, but which I produced basically. In the divisions 2 and 3, so here, you can see that in one case, I followed the scribe's version, so in this upper system, whereas in the other, I replaced the syllables to the position that was followed by the other 9 control pieces. So the fa should have been placed between this dum and this teke. Okay. The third and last case study is the Nihavend Beste in Usul Zencir by Hacı Faik Bey with the first line Visali Yâre Gönül Sarf-ı Himmet istermiş. The prosodic meter is mefailun, feilatun, mefailun, falun, and belongs to Bahri Münster. This piece is very well known. It can be found in many music and song text anthologies. Yet it has some interesting aspects in regard to the lyrics and hence also to the relationship between usul and prosodic meter that I would like to talk about. So this piece has a repertoire number 10986, which will be important in order to identify this piece in the following study. I have the impression that the longer the usul is, less room is there for performative freedom. So usul zencir, as being one of the longer usuls, shows a very clear correlation between the usul and the prosodic meter. Let me open this document first. Right. So the syllables of Hacı beste can be found in the system above the usul line. So here I have highlighted it actually. If we go through the piece together, we see that the accuracy of some syllables in all of the different pieces coincide on the same beats. So if we look here, this piece open, or all of the pieces open actually with a non-prosodic syllable, which is yar. And also, yeah, the first syllable meh, the short syllable meh, coincides almost on the first beat. So does almost the syllable fa, but especially the syllables i and lün appear on the same beats. If we go on, we see that the system is actually very accurate. The pattern is very accurate. Yeah. So in this piece, or in the pieces that we see here, we have one deviation, for example, here in the third foot, and we can check if this foot was actually put in the same way in the mianhane, just to control. So we have the mianhane, this is the first foot, the second foot, and the third foot. We see that the third foot was here more in line than in the zeminhane. But what I would like to talk about is actually another deviation that is much graver, which occurred in the mianhane of this piece. So we have here in the third foot, so here it starts actually a deviation that actually brings all of the balance of this pattern into a great mess. So I can show you here. So the meh does not coincide, as you can see. So we are in usul zencir, but this is the fahde subcycle of usul zencir, and we are here in the teke teke. And this is actually the only source that gave the syllable meh at this section. And we have here the opening of the usul chamber with a non-prosodic syllable ah, which still can be considered as regular because we have ah here in two other, or yar, a non-prosodic syllable in other pieces as well. But when we look at the fa, i, lün, I have marked this syllable here with an asterisk because we have a syllable here actually that does not have any corresponding syllable in the prosodic meter. So this is a problem. And because of this inaccuracies, all the balance of this meter towards the end of this piece, as you can see in the fe, also ilün was also brought out of balance. Wow, what happened here? Hold on a second, I am facing here minor, now it's working, okay. So in this second document, you see the distribution of the syllables with the equivalent prosodic syllables. So we have the same piece of Hacı Faik Bey here to bring you this example and to show you where this problem actually comes from. So if we now look at the third foot, we see that the syllable meh, so here, which I had already highlighted before, as because this meh should have actually should be here at the beginning of the chamber cycle. But more important is that in the third foot, only the syllables fa, i, and lün, so the nesh, e, all, have corresponding prosodic syllables, but the neshe dar this dar syllable does not have any corresponding prosodic syllables. Yeah. And this is also probably the reason why the distribution of the syllables in the text underlay got completely mixed up. So let's look at this problem more closely. So I assume that the problem in regard to usul and prosodic meter seem to have derived from an inaccurate transmission of the song lyrics. When I addressed this issue to our text editor, Neslihan Demirkol, to whom I owe so much of my findings, she searched this piece in Nazım's Divan and in song text anthologies and found variant readings that fit actually the song's prosodic meter. So whereas this line appears in the inaccurate version, such as neşedar olmak için here in the manuscript that we have been looking at, in Nazım's Divan it was given as hoş geçinmek için, or other 19th century song text anthologies gave neşe bulmak için. And both of these versions, so that fit the prosodic syllables, as you can see here. So the neşe bulmak için, fits to the fa, the e, the short syllable, lün long, fe short. Here we have a ulama, e short, and lün long again. So interestingly, the line that apparently caused problems in the prosodic meter circulated mostly among the music anthologies, but not so much in the song text anthologies. In order to solve the inaccuracies that derive from the versions that we found in the music sources, we adopted for the edition of our manuscript, for our manuscript, the third line from the printed song text anthology, Hanende. This opened new ways to interpret and read the usul syllable ratio of this piece, which I would like to present in the following. So my suggestion in the edition of the same piece in the manuscript that we're dealing with, where the scribe did not provide any text underlay, was firstly to show the text from Hanende and distribute the syllables in line with the more accurate meter and usul ratio based on the research data that I have previously shown. So I have prepared a document for this again. Here you go. So in this document, I have juxtaposed the distribution and duration of the syllables in the Mianhane of the same piece in two different manuscripts. So in the upper system, the scribe had provided a text underlay. In the lower system, I indicated the text underlay. So whereas in the beginning of the piece, both versions follow the same pattern. So we have here, for example, the first foot, which mostly correspond to each other, and also the second foot does. But then the third foot, as we know, is problematic, which I have not repeated here in the edition. So we see that in the third and fourth feet, we have here different patterns. So the first is the generally known but inaccurate pattern that was found in most of the music collections. So the ending of the third hemistich, which does not correspond to the prosodic meter, but furthermore also the fourth hemistich. So the syllabication of the fourth hemistich is a bit strange because it was syllabicated as mak için, and this fe is actually a short syllable and mak is a long syllable, so this does not really fit to each other. It would have been more accurate to syllabicate this word as ma ki chun, so with a liaison or with an ulama. The second version below is my suggestion for a text underlay that is not only more in line with the usul and prosodic meter pattern, it is based on a text that suits the prosodic meter, and the distribution of the syllables in the underlay follows the ratio between usul and prosodic meter based on the research data that I could obtain from many other control pieces. So we have here the third foot, and I have used the ulama here, so bul ma ki. Right. So in this preliminary research, the patterns of the usul and the prosodic meters that I have looked at more closely were based on the pieces of the codex that I'm editing. Of course, there are more combinations that have to be looked at. For further research, it would be very beneficial, for example, to develop a database that visualizes this relationship between the usul and the prosodic meters. As for the analysis of Ottoman music and transmission of the repertoire, I consider the analysis indispensable because it is possible to formulate new research questions in regard to music transmission that probably in parts was inaccurate. This also would help to offer alternative readings of bestes and samais that probably throughout time underwent some changes. Similar studies have to be conducted for the tarranim syllables, which I could not consider in the framework of my study. My primary goal was the music edition of a codex, a research project that explicitly looks at the relationship between usul and tarranim syllables would bring further important insights. And those who are familiar with the Persianate repertoire in Ottoman music will know that it is hard to determine the prosodic meters of Persian lyrics. Yet I believe that experts could study the prosodic meters of Persian lyrics, and based on these materials, a similar study on the relationship between usul and the prosodic meter could be conducted. Our text editor has already taken some initial steps and collaborated with an expert in Persian poetry. Having said this, I also understood that more expertise is needed that exceeds the knowledge of one discipline. Ottoman musicians were trained in many disciplines and knew how to intertwine the many elements of divan poetry and music. There are probably only very few scholars that still possess this combined knowledge. Therefore, I can only restate that this study greatly benefited from the collaboration of the fields of musicology and literature studies. In a similar way, scholars from Persian literature and music could greatly contribute and help to discover and gain new perspectives on old Ottoman musical materials. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. We are grateful for this illuminating, fascinating lecture. May I ask a question just to begin? Of course, our members of our audience will be able to ask questions.
Please go ahead, Dr.
But he's going to send me those, and also the audience may ask their questions on the YouTube channel chat.
Sure.
My question is, the deviations, do these apply to the works of the legendary composers such as Tri and Dede Efendi? What is your view on that?
Yes. So first of all, I have not conducted any systematic research on this, but I can tell, I don't know for Itri, but I became aware that the pieces of Dede Efendi's were the most accurate. So the syllabication that I found in the pieces of Dede Efendi actually always coincided with the pattern of the other control pieces. So this is something remarkable. And I assume that this is also will apply to composers of the same generation. Yes.
Yeah. The Efendi wouldn't settle for anything less, I suppose.
Yes, yes, true. This is also very true. So this actually underlines, his great achievements in music and the combination of poetry and music, actually.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just checking if I have any questions from Salih Demirtaş.
Yes.
Not at the moment. Let's wait for a while. In the meantime, may I ask you what exactly inspired you for this research? Have you been studying the mejmuas and the Hamparsun notation? Could you give us some information about that?
Yes, sure. So so I have been working already with a plethora of music notation sources, but also with some song text anthologies, both written and printed sources. What now encouraged me for this research was, the fact that the manuscript that I was assigned from our project director is a vocal manuscript, but it does not have any text. So we had to find them and apply the lyrics, the block lyrics somehow to the text underlays. Now there are different methods to do this. Yeah. So the first step was to look at concordant sources. Because we find many concordant sources in other music manuscripts, and to see how they did it, and then just copy the way they distributed the syllables below the notation. I just became aware of the problem that that these distributions do not always correspond to each other. So I would have to take a decision to say, okay, I took this interpretation, but then I would have to somehow scholarly explain why did I decided for this interpretation or this reading and not for the other one. So in order to avoid this, I looked if there was a way, maybe a more methodological way to approach this issue. And I had heard before already that there is seemingly a relationship between the prosodical meter and the usul. So this is something that can be found in the primary sources since Meragi, actually. I was curious to see if there is a relationship in the sources that we are working with and how this relationship could look like. And this is what actually encouraged me. And I've tried to approach, I mean, this is just a work in progress. I'm still working on it, and there's still, many research to be done.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. Salih Bey says there aren't any questions at the moment, so I think for a while we can continue and dwell on the subject. Let's give it another 5 minutes, and I also should say, maybe it may encourage our audience, we may make this a bilingual conclusion part, and we can accept questions in Turkish as well. Türkçe soru sormak isteyen meslektaşlarımız ve dostlarımız tabii ki Türkçe sorabilirler. Elimizden geldiği kadar İngilizcesini de tercüme ederek hem Türkçe cevap vermeye Doktor Mıhçı hem de İngilizce cevap vermeye gayret edecektir umuyorum. Bir mesaj daha geldi. Yes, there is a question regarding identifying the deviations. Do you think the changes within the patterns of the usul structures throughout time could also make it possible to contribute to this process? Should I read it again?
No, I have understood, I think.
Yeah.
I'm just notating it once more for myself.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for this very, this is a very smart question, actually. So, of course, there are changes in the usul patterns throughout time. I have not posed this question to myself in my research. The only thing that contradicts this assumption is that that we have a plethora of pieces that have these combinations of a specific prosodical meter and an usul, and that the deviations, they just become evident. I mean, they become evident from this comparison, actually. So this is nothing I just see from the piece when I look at it. I become aware of it when I compare it with the control pieces. So when I see that there is a great majority of 10 or even more, I mean, I now used in my presentation here 10 pieces, but of course you can look at much more pieces that used specific combinations. Then you will become aware that there seemingly is a determined pattern, and that some manuscripts or scribes probably while copying from manuscript to manuscript, or while writing it down while someone is performing the piece, probably committed some minor mistakes. I mean, this is nothing very this happens. I mean, these kind of things. So this is why I would see this more as an issue in the more in the transmission of the music pieces rather than the development of the usul, which is more which would require actually much more detailed research also in the history of the usuls, which of course did change in the last 3 to 4 centuries.
Yes. It's a fascinating subject, and somehow I believe there is a lot to be said, because the history of usul and usuller, of usuls, hasn't really been, I think, studied in depth, and the advar,
Yes.
They are absolutely fascinating material to be worked on more. And also the same accounts for the evzan, for the vezinler.
Correct.
Because as I'm sure you know, in Arabic poetry, there is a different style of using those vezins. In Persian and Persianate courts, there is absolutely a different taste and the different way of using it. And the Ottomans had their own ways. So all that, I think, would really enrich this.
Yes.
Extremely.
Yes.
So, let me check.
Yes.
Any other? Not at the moment. So I think we can give it a few more minutes.
Yeah. So maybe to add to what you have just said.
Yes, please.
So the usuls are actually, so if we look at song text anthologies, we find very often usuls printed, also in the printed versions, but also in handwritten song text anthologies. We sometimes find at the beginning or in between usul tables. So they write the usuls, and this seemed to be something also particular of hanendes, so of singers actually. So that they, just with the information on the usul and the güfte, the block lyrics, and the makam, they were able to reproduce the song from the memory in an accurate and correct form, probably. So this is an assumption, and this is maybe also what musicians learned in the mesh kane, maybe. So because they learned the repertoire by heart normally. And then these elements such as prosody and usul and the relationship and the makam. So these were all elements that helped to remember actually the repertoire.
That makes perfect sense. It is part of their learning methodology, if you like.
Yeah,
it's a very interesting tradition. We have a question and congratulations from Nilgün Doğru Söz.
Oh, that's so sweet. Yes, thank you.
Harika bir sunumdu sevgili Ersin Mıhçı. Çok tebrik ederim. It was a marvelous presentation. Many congratulations, dear Ersin Mıhçı.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Çok
Thank you very much for sending your message in English and Turkish. There is a question from Salih Demirtaş, to whom we are grateful for his endless assistance and
absolutely
for these presentations. What do you think about the comparative study of performance with and without the deviations for these kind of analysis?
I find this is a great suggestion, Salih. Thank you very much. I have been comparing this, while I was preparing here this study, I've been always listening to the performances that were available on compact discs or on YouTube by famous musicians, and I saw that that the performances actually followed mostly the versions that could be found in today's sources actually. But I would really I think it is a very important contribution to music, first of all, if we question these deviations and then offer alternative interpretations and see how performers look at it. I mean, I am working with this on a very theoretical basis, but maybe performers would have a different perspective on this issue. So I would be very open for discussion with performers as well, and also help. It would be fascinating actually to prepare also a performance of some of these pieces, especially the third case study that I've prepared, which has definitely a strange foot with this Neşeder olmak için, which does not fit to the prosodical meter. So why not create also a performance of this piece with the correct, at least correct in, of course, correct or more accurate version of the güfte.
You are absolutely right. I think it would be wonderful to, even based on your research, if these studies and analysis could be carried on, then there could be almost a database showing the more correct versions, and perhaps those more accurate versions could be performed, and then we could see which one comes better to the ear, which one sounds nicer, sounds better.
Yes.
It's of course a work in progress, isn't it? That's
yes, it is. I mean, of course, there's so many combinations. I mean, I cannot, of course, provide an analysis of all of these combinations, because I did this work only for edition. I mean, I'm doing a musical edition. This is my goal, actually. My research is not about this topic, basically. It is just a side product. But I see that, I mean, there are people in Turkey that work on this issue, that have published articles about this that I really, really find fascinating. There's also a very good doctoral dissertation. But in the daily use, I think this topic is not very present. So I think it would be very beneficial for Turkish musicology in general. So if we analyze pieces, so we have a methodology for analyzing pieces. So this should be one part in the analysis, actually, of the pieces, I think. And in order to carry out this analysis, this database that you have mentioned would be necessary, where we can compare and see what is the general pattern, and do this piece that we are analyzing fit to this pattern, yes or not? And if not, then why? And then things become actually interesting.
Yes, it will become very interesting.
Yes.
And the Persian lyrics, which I find very interesting, I think that could be an especially slippery slope, because I'm sure you know, many of those lyrics are not as they left the mouths of their poets today. They appear to have somehow shifted color and meaning, and I don't even know if many of them have their vezins anymore. Have you ever had the chance to look at any of those?
Yes, so of course I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not an expert. I don't know any Persian, but I've been collaborating with our colleague Mohsen Mahdawi, we exchanged some ideas. We gave him some pieces, and he was able to reconstruct actually the hemistiches that, as you have said, were corrupted throughout time in the Ottoman music repertoire. And based on these reconstructions, we could also reconstruct the prosodical meter. But this is a topic that requires much dedication. I see many studies that the Persian pieces are a bit are treated in a way not really well, let's say. I mean, they're, on the one hand, they are looked as authoritative and old pieces and so on. But on the other hand, because there is so little knowledge about them, it is difficult to permeate, actually, and to understand and to analyze in more detail. For example, in one of our pieces from the last edition of 204, we had this this Kavli Muhteşem, which was the Kavli Muhteşem, which was transmitted in all of the 19th century sources with 3 hemistiches. And so this is and this should have actually have 4 hemistiches, and we were able to find, together with the text editor, the 4th hemistich in only one song text anthology. And and reconstructed.
We are talking about the Rastkarı Muhteşem.
Yes. Yeah, exactly, this one.
And you basically, what you're saying is there was a lost hemistich.
Exactly, yes.
Oh, fascinating.
So I've written also an article on this, which hopefully will be published soon. So there are this Persian repertoire, but there are many more.
I find this very interesting because I noticed, many people may have noticed it as well, but it's a personal observation. In the Dugah, Der Yemeni Pişimeni, for instance, it should be Der Yemeni Bameni Pişimeni. So how would you interpret that?
Yeah, so as I told you, I'm not an expert. I always need a lot of research. I have to look at primary sources always and compare how the primary sources. I mean, there are many, in our libraries, there are many manuscripts that have this Persianate repertoire in form of güfte only, so without music. But this is already a starting point to see how this repertoire, because they're very different from each other sometimes. And they give very, very important hints how to approach this interesting repertoire. But this goes also a bit now in a different topic, actually.
We shouldn't dwell on too many side neighboring issues. I see there is another question here.
Yes.
And this one is, as far as the deviations identified in your study, are there a particular section within the vocal genre that you observe more deviations, such as zeminhane or miyanhane?
Right, thank you for this question. So if we really speak about deviations the way I do, then yeah, they happen in both hanes. So the miyanhane may have deviations, as well as the zeminhane may have deviations. But I have the impression, I mean, this is now based on the research that I've conducted so far, my impression is that the miyanhane tends to be much more accurate. So the miyanhane is much more accurate, follows the strict patterns than the zeminhane. So the zeminhane tends to be maybe more free. I mean, when I say free, I don't refer to deviations, but maybe some of the syllables may be a bit earlier, a bit later, but they're still in the same scheme, so they don't break with the scheme. But the miyanhane always is much more accurate with the overall pattern. This is something that I've observed.
Right. Thank you very much for your answer. From Nihan Tahta İşleyen, dear Dr. Mıhçı, many thanks and congratulations for this detailed presentation. And then there is a question here which says, are there any examples in this period based on the relationship between lyric structures that go beyond the patterns of usul and or vezin?
Right. I don't know if I understood this question correctly. So
I repeat.
So the question is if there are any other...
Are there any examples in this period based on the relationship between lyric structures that go beyond the patterns of usul and or vezin? Well, I don't understand neither, because I don't know what is meant by lyric structures. It is probably the content of the poetry that is supposed to be lyric,
right?
Which makes it a ghazal, I suppose.
Right.
But I'm not too sure about the exact
okay.
content of the question. You may tell us.
But still, I can. I mean, of course, I cannot. The only research that I've conducted is based on this relationship. However, it would be interesting. I mean, these are theses that can be researched further. So one is maybe the relationship between the melody and the words. So the lyrics. If there is maybe, I don't know, we know from European music, for example, that sometimes that the meaning of the words are somehow musically represented. So this is an issue that can be looked at more closely. But another issue is also if there is another structuring element, such as the seir. So if we can see, for example, that the maqam, the interpretation of the maqam has to, I don't know, because we know that the seir has also a determined sequence of pitches, and we can look. I mean, I don't have any clue at this moment, but it would be interesting to see if the seir can also be somehow related to the usul and the prosodic meter. So this would be something to look at more closely, which would lead probably to further fruitful findings.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The second section of Nihan Tahtaişliyan's question is, if so, is this a sign of compositional failure, or does it somehow open up an alternative creative space? Of course, I am asking in the context of that period.
Yeah, this is difficult to tell at the current stage. I mean, today the presentation that I gave today was only on bestes and semais. Of course, there are much more vocal music genres such as Nakış. I have worked with Nakış as well. I've done this study also for Nakış, bestes and Nakış semais. Partly also for cars, but not for şarkıs, for example. So what you probably refer to would maybe make more sense in the context of the şarkı repertoire, which also existed in the 19th century, which had new influences. So in the şarkı, I mean, the beste repertoire, the beste and the semai that we're working with are actually in old repertoire per se. So it is maybe difficult to speak here in the 19th century of new impulses of an old repertoire. So probably this would apply more to the şarkı repertoire that composers in the 19th century tried to compose with maybe new ways, with new aims, and so on and so forth. But for the beste and semai, if I understood the question correctly, Nihan, I would say that this is probably not the case.
Yes, thank you very much. We would like to thank Nihan Tahtaişliyan for her questions. I just received a question now in Turkish from Nihan Hanım. Söz kalıplarının usul ve vezin kalıplarının dışına çıkan örneklerine rastlıyor muyuz? Serbest tartımlı biçimlerin dışında. Would you like me to repeat?
Yes, and maybe we should also give an English translation.
Yes, söz kalıplarının usul ve vezin kalıplarının dışına çıkan örneklerine rastlıyor muyuz? Would you like to translate that?
So the question is if we find any moments where where we have elements, the söz kalıp, how would you translate this? Words may be outside of the usul and the prosodic meter scheme. Is that the question?
Yes. Söz kalıplarının usul ve vezin kalıplarının dışına çıkan örneklerine rastlıyor muyuz? Do we see any examples in which the verbal patterns, shall we say the words, step outside of the patterns of the vezin? That's the question.
Currently, I cannot think of any case where the söz kalıp or the verbal pattern would actually go or move outside.
It would be very unorthodox, don't you think? It's
yes. So I cannot think of any case currently. I don't say that it does not exist, but in my research that I've conducted so far, I could not observe any of these cases where the word the söz kalıp would break with the usul vezin and the.
Yes, but it's a very interesting question still, yes. Don't you think? Yeah.
Yes, I will note it down.
Yes.
I will consider this in my future research. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And Nihan Hanım says thank you very much. I think there is another message coming through. Gözde Çolakoğlu says, bu değerli sunum için çok teşekkür ediyoruz. She thanks us for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you for listening.
Yes. And I think now we have just a little more time if there are any other questions that members of our audience would like to ask Dr. Mıhçı. While we are waiting, I would like to thank you very much. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure was mine, absolutely. Yes, thank you very much.
Absolutely. This was very enlightening and fascinating. I hope on behalf of the TUMAC family that you are going to continue with your research, and hopefully we will find some other interesting aspects of the problems coming up.
That would be great. Yes, I thank you very much for your kind words, Dr. Keskiner.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I don't think there are any other questions. So I would like to renew my thanks, and I do hope we will see you maybe on another session.
Yes, that would be great. Hopefully.
Thank you so much.
Inshallah. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. And here we finish our session.
Right.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.